I refuse to be scared of any food, and I particularly refuse to be scared of making any food. I find that people often talk about certain baking processes or dishes, I guess, as inducing fear for them. A big one is pastry. My mom was afraid of pie crust. Making pies every Thanksgiving and Christmas was a stressful experience for her. But I feel like there's absolutely no reason to be afraid of making anything, which is why we're gonna explore soufflé. Soufflé. I've never made a soufflé before. I don't even think I've ever eaten a soufflé before, but I've long since been fascinated by this dish that people claim is so difficult and so persnickety. Several months ago, we finally started making creme brulee at home because it's probably both Matt and I's favorite dessert ever. But because people always said like, oh, creme brulee is so hard to make, blah, 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 I just kept putting off actually making it at home myself. So we finally made creme brulee at home and now we make it all the time. Probably too much. Having conquered the creme brulee at home, it's time for the next step. And that is why we shall soufflé. Do you guys ever get really annoyed that I'm constantly holding a cup of coffee but never actually drinking from it because I cut those parts out because I assume you don't want to hear all the time? But sometimes I realize that like you're just constantly seeing me pick up the coffee, bring it very close to my face, and then take it back away. Sorry if that annoys you, but I think you'd be more annoyed from the constant slurping if I left it in. Anyway, as usual, I can't just make one thing one time. I must make all the things several times until I feel some level of mastering has been achieved. I've decided to make 5 different soufflés, but we're gonna start off the whole process today with a basic soufflé, a flavorless soufflé. I mean, I guess it's egg flavored. The goal, of course, is to compare 5 different flavors, 5 different recipes. The methods don't differ that much like the Madeline ones did, so I don't really feel a need to compare multiple different chocolate soufflé recipes. But my plan is to follow the recipes pretty closely on the first try, and if the soufflés don't turn out, to then make them again and start tweaking the process. So let's soufflé, shall we? Do you like my angle change there? Nope, we're not baking yet. So honestly, the hardest part of this entire process is not really gonna be making the stuff. It's gonna be figuring out how to make just the right amount. The most common soufflé dish, the like single big one that serves multiple people, is 1.5 quarts. I don't have one of those, and I wouldn't want to make one that big anyway because it's just me and Matt here, and Matt's really picky and probably won't eat half of these to start with. So what I have is 4 ramekins of this size. They're 6 ounces each. I'd love to only make 2 of them, but that might be too much math. The 1.5 quart dish equals 8 of these. So that would be an easy, like, either half the recipe or if you can, 1/4 the recipe, but not all the recipes use the 1.5 quart dish. I also found one that used 8 4-ounce dishes. Then there was one that used 6 12-ounce dishes. And to top it off, the first recipe that I'm using today is meant for a 4-cup or 1 liter soufflé dish. How many quarts is 1 liter? Wait, what? That's not right. Oh my god, all of my math has been wrong. So yeah, I think the first step of every single recipe is going to be math. Why? Why does math follow me everywhere I go? So I can't start baking until I figure that out. So if 1.5 quart is 48 ounces, then 1 cup is 8 ounces, which this is less than, which means a 4-cup dish is 32 ounces-ish, and 6 goes into 32 a little more than 5 times. So I think what I'm gonna do on this one is half the recipe, which I think will give me enough for 3 ramekins. I'm okay with that. Having done the math for today, let's go actually start baking now. 20 minutes later.
In order to ensure that I don't forget I'm halving this recipe halfway through, as I am prone to do, I started by rewriting all the ingredients in half form, which involved halving 3/4 a cup. More math. Then I immediately did the thing I said I wouldn't do and altered the recipe. But y'all, it didn't say to butter the dish. And maybe I should have left it as a test, but that seems bonkers. So according to almost every other recipe I've seen, I buttered the ramekins with upward strokes and applied a thin layer of breadcrumbs, liberally dumping them all over the counter as though I'm not going to be the one who has to clean that up. Now, I do not typically mise en place, y'all. I'm more like mise en stash everything in the places it belongs and pull it out one at a time when I need it. But I am using such small amounts of ingredients here, like 1 tablespoon of flour, that's it, that it seemed wise to have all of it at the ready. Have you ever tried to guess where 87 milliliters would fall between a 75 and 100 line? Let's hope precision isn't the thing that wins you a perfect souffle. Melt the butter, add the flour and seasonings, stir, dump in the milk, stir again, and you have bechamel, I guess?
I think I just made bechamel for the first time.
Then I tempered the egg yolks like you would for a custard and left that to cool a little. Whipped the egg whites to stiff peaks.
Stiff peaks.
And then did the recommended thing of mixing 1/3 of the egg white into the sauce more thoroughly before then folding the sauce into the rest. I have learned from Bake Off to be fairly thorough, though gentle, with the folding though. I can't have clumps of white in the final souffle. 'Twould be a scandal. I ended up having exactly enough batter for 2 ramekins, although I think maybe they should be filled more than this, like right up to the top. Oh well, we're going with it. The bake time on this recipe was for a large dish, but most places I looked either said to cut that in half or go for like 12 to 15 minutes for the small ramekins, so I started with 12 to be safe. Ended up giving it 14 total, and y'all, I think I succeeded in souffleing on my first try. Eep! They aren't kidding about how quickly you have to eat it though. It started falling the moment I took it out of the oven, but the texture inside was fluffy and consistent throughout, and it was actually really good, even in this flavorless version. It was like eating an extremely light and fluffy scrambled eggs, but then I think because of the bit of flour in it, there was still a different overall texture and taste. A successful day 1 and no remake required.
I'm just gonna shrink because I don't feel like readjusting the frame. Laziness wins! All right, day 2, y'all. It is time for cheese souffle. Yesterday went very well, I would say, so I am... What's the opposite of disheartened? Enheartened? Encouraged? I am encouraged. This recipe is for a 48 ounce or 1.5 quart dish, which we know is equal to 8 of my small ramekins. I definitely need to half the recipe. It would kind of be better if I could fourth the recipe, but according to the halved ingredients that I just wrote down, fourthing it would be difficult. It's not too much different of a recipe. It's basically the exact same ingredients with the addition of cheese. They do optionally say that you could put in Dijon mustard and or cayenne pepper or hot sauce. I don't know that I'll do that, but I might use that as an excuse to put in other seasonings that I prefer, like garlic. Everything is better with garlic. This one does specify that you're not supposed to fill the dish to the top, just to like the inner ridge, which is where I filled them to yesterday. So I guess I did that right. This recipe tells you how to serve the souffle. Scoop out portions onto each diner's plate, in case you weren't sure. Let's give it a go!
First, I had to snack, cause do you ever get so hungry that by the time you start making food, you can't focus on making the food because you just want to eat food? I'm always grabbing a small snack right as we start making a meal, and Matt is like, why? We are literally about to eat. I just call it an hors d'oeuvre. Once again, we start by buttering the dishes, but first I had to turn some shredded Parmesan into grated Parmesan because I was not paying attention when I bought the ingredients. No harm, no foul. upward strokes of the butter because that somehow makes a difference. Then dump in some Parmesan for that textured coating this time. Slap those dishes around a bit and tra-la, or Bob's your uncle as some would say. I did notice right after this that this recipe says to wipe the rim of your ramekins, so I went ahead and did that with my fingers because clearly I don't mind a mess. Then it was back to mise en place. This time with the 1 3/4 tablespoon of flour being the hard thing to measure out. Also, due to the halving, I need 2.5 egg whites, but luckily I had the leftover egg white from yesterday, so I guesstimated a half of that. I'm never that concerned about egg measurements since they can vary so drastically in size anyway. I was supposed to use 1.5 ounces of cheese, but that didn't feel like nearly enough, so I bumped it up to 2 ounces. And then, since it was a rather thick shred, I tried to break it up a little so it won't be like giant clumps in these tiny ramekins. So we melt a tiny piece of butter, make a roux, and turn that into a bechamel. Deja vu. Hopefully this is thick enough. Notably, this recipe said to add the seasoning after taking it off the heat, then let it cool a bit before whisking in the yolks one at a time. Whisk those whites again, and then mix a third into the base, add the cheese, and start folding. The final batter was a lot lumpier this time, partially because of the cheese, but also I probably should have folded it a bit more. It started really feeling like I was knocking all the air out, so I did a light panic and stopped, but I was probably imagining that. This ended up being perfectly enough for 4 ramekins, so that works great for me. I left them in for 16 minutes, and y'all, they rose rather erratically, but I'm still calling this a success, especially since they were also the perfectly set, airy, and light texture inside. I'll have to do a little research on what causes the lumpy rise on top, but I have a feeling it has something to do with the lumpy batter I put in, so, you know, fair. Also, I'm looking forward to a sweet souffle now, cause even though the cheese and spices made this one a lot more interesting than yesterday's, I feel like I'll prefer this dish as a dessert. On the other hand, Matt really liked the cheese souffle, so it's all down to taste.
All right, day 3, we are mixing it up a little and going to chocolate souffle. Finally, dessert. I'm feeling fairly confident. It's been going well so far. That being said, we're introducing not only sugar, but also a whole mess of extra liquid in the form of melted chocolate. From what I could tell in researching, this is the one that kind of changes up the method the most. So my recipe for today, I momentarily thought would be even worse math than usual because it doesn't even give a mass of the dish. Instead, it goes with a 20 centimeter diameter. But thankfully, they also tell you here at the top, you can use the large 20 centimeter souffle dish or 4 smaller ramekins. It does not say what size, but I'm assuming my size. So I shouldn't even have to half this because I don't mind making 4. I'll just eat a little extra dessert today. Let's do it!
This part's old hat now, butter them dishes. Although this time the dusting inside is sugar rather than breadcrumbs or cheese. With those in the fridge, it was time to gather the ingredients, and the more I did so, the more I started to realize that this is definitely going to be way too much stuff to fit into my 4 little ramekins. Like, that is twice as much milk as I've ever used before, plus there's all this chocolate and 5 eggs? I'm suspicious. My eggs decided to hate me today. I've never had this much trouble separating yolks and whites. Well, really, it was just the shells that hated me. They kept crumbling into my whites in tiny little bits. Ugh. There's also a pretty significant amount of cocoa powder in this recipe, which you're supposed to sift into the yolks.
Yeah.
I hate sifting. Just to be safe, I went ahead and buttered another dish for this batter, although I don't have anything normal to use, like another ramekin, so I'm just using this weird oval pie dish I have. For this recipe, you start by melting the chocolate with the milk and some sugar in a bain-marie. Downside of having a gas stove is that anytime you're stirring something in a pan for a long time, you will scorch your arm hair off. Bring on the mitts! I was already pretty concerned by how watery this chocolate mixture is, and then you're supposed to mix the cocoa powder into the egg yolks, which was impossible? Maybe I should have tried harder, but the cocoa powder was way overpowering the amount of liquid the yolks had to offer. So I just dumped the whole thing into the chocolate and whisked like crazy. Still very liquidy, but now with weird clumps. The recipe didn't say to cook this mixture or thicken it or anything, just to mix it in, so I did as I was told. Making the meringue went fine as usual. Nice to finally be adding sugar to it to get that lovely glossiness though. As usual, I'm using way too small of bowls, but in all fairness, I didn't really expect to have this much batter. So I strained the chocolate mixture into a new bowl to try to remove some of those weird clumps, and then kinda added them back in anyway. Whoops. This was not easy to fold together. The past two soufflés have had like a thick sauce mixture as the base, but this one is just straight up liquid, so it doesn't really want to incorporate into the egg whites properly. And it just doesn't look right, y'all. My hopes for success today are plummeting. And why is there so much of it? I had tons left, even after filling my backup dish. Honestly, I tend to assume operator error first when things look so off, but I went back over the ingredient amounts and the method, and there wasn't anything I did differently.
This is not right.
Maybe it'll still puff, but yeah, I don't think so. Honestly, they look better than I expected, but they aren't right at all. They poofed a little, but they also really drastically cracked on top, which I'm pretty sure is not supposed to happen. And I think they could have done with a minute or two more of cooking, but since they're already so dark in color, I really couldn't tell at all when to take them out. I also clearly didn't mix in the meringue enough, so there were tons of pockets of egg white. I mean, I still ate a whole one, it tasted pretty good, but I cannot in good conscience call this a win. How the mighty have fallen.
Welcome to day 3, the remix. Turns out I think I was just super unlucky in choosing that recipe. So last night I pulled up Sally's baking addiction because that's my go-to for a lot of recipes and I tend to trust hers. And this souffle recipe could not be more different. First of all, there's no milk and no cocoa powder in it at all. There is butter in it, which makes sense. All the other souffles I made had butter in them. And, huzzah for not having to do math again, her recipe is for 4 6-ounce ramekins. She specifies, thank you very much. And it only uses 3 eggs. So all in all, this sounds a lot more right from the start. So here we go, it's 8 in the morning and I'm gonna make chocolate souffle again. Away we go!
We start with butter and chocolate, and I could have just used this 4-ounce chocolate bar in its entirety, but for some reason felt the need to use up my chocolate chips first and complicate matters. This recipe also isn't nearly as hasty as the others, so I didn't really feel a need to mise en place, but also I'm just kind of used to it now. These eggs cooperated for me today and didn't leave half their shells crumbled in a bowl, so things are going my way, y'all. We're back to the Bon Marie and burnt fingertips, but isn't this looking so much better than yesterday? Namely, because it's not just a giant vat of sloshing liquid. I was definitely supposed to let it cool down a bit before dumping in the egg yolks, whoops, but I whisked them around really hard and I don't see any clumps of cooked eggs, so I think we're fine. And that's it for the base. So simple, right? Now we're back to whipping those egg whites into a shaving cream consistency. Has anyone ever tried shaving with meringue? Attempted to clean the counter at the same time because multitasking. Boom! I could make meringue in my sleep these days. I folded the meringue into the chocolate in 3 parts, doing the more thorough stir on the first one like normal, and oh my goodness, this is the best folding in I've done yet. It was just so much easier. And if you're thinking that I missed a step, au contraire, this recipe actually says to refrigerate your batter briefly post-folding, using that time to preheat the oven and butter your ramekins. She was also the first to note that you should generously butter your ramekins, so I really slapped that stuff in there. I very much appreciate that she noted in this recipe that the batter can actually last overnight in the fridge. I've definitely been rushing with all the previous soufflés, feeling like I had to get them in the oven as fast as possible or they'll just melt to mush, but I was able to slow down and make these look nice. There was just enough for 4 ramekins, and I even did the little channel around the outside edge that she suggests. My hopes are as high as a well-risen souffle. In anticipation of these turning out perfectly, I even whipped up some cream to accompany them, since Matt prefers his chocolate watered, or rather, milked down. These had about 14 minutes in the oven and only started splitting on the top at the very end, so maybe I'm overcooking them. Either way, I'll take that gentle rise as a success. Also, I very much see the appeal of serving souffle with a cold cream of some kind. Since you have to eat them hot out of the oven, it helps prevent tongue burning. I loved this one. Thought it was completely delicious. but Matt said the failure from yesterday was better. Granted, I forced him to eat this souffle while still in bed, so he might be biased, or just not in the mood for dessert first thing in the morning.
It is day 4 in souffle land, and admittedly, I'm getting tired of souffles. But we crack onward! It's at least a little later in the day this time, so I don't have to eat souffle at 9 in the morning. Alright, today is lemon souffle. I am using Martha Stewart's recipe for this, and it's gonna be a heavy math day. 6 12-ounce souffle dishes. Why so much? I'd really prefer to only make 2, but I guess I could make 3. So I need to fourth this recipe. Like, I really need to fourth it. So we're talking about using half a tablespoon of butter. That is so little, but that's what we're going with.
6 hours later.
Okay, we have our fourth recipe. The weirdest thing is the 2.5 egg whites, which quite frankly, I'll probably just do 2 egg whites. Maybe I'll bump it up and just do 3 egg whites. Try to get a massive rise on these babies. Let's make another souffle. Yay!
Martha's method is a little different from all the ones I've done previously. I guess because of the addition of the lemon juice? I don't know. We are back to buttering those dishes first though. I'm only gonna butter 3 because regardless of how much batter I get out of this, I don't want more than 3 lemon souffles. Then I had to go source a lemon.
Look at that perfect baby.
Always an adventure, y'all. Tip your lemon pickers well. I both zested and chopped the lemon peel so that it would be in really small bits since it's not getting strained out of the batter, then proceeded to make a giant mess in the pursuit of 1 shot of lemon juice. We're back to separating eggs. I decided to go with 3 egg whites and just save a yolk for later. That allowed me to pull all the little weird bits out of the whites and still definitely have enough overall. Y'all, these ingredient amounts are laughably tiny. Look at that little dash of sugar, just a quick little pinch of flour. What on earth? And for once, I got a bowl that is way bigger than necessary. Martha basically has you make a lemon custard, so you whisk the eggs into the flour and zest, then heat the milk and temper that in before heating the whole thing to a saucy consistency. Saucy. And oh look, I lied, the zest does get strained out. Then you mix in the butter. Yes, I've given up now and I'm stirring with a knife, unapologetically. I was hesitant to add this much lemon juice since it seemed like it would just turn the whole thing to a liquid reminiscent of the bad chocolate souffle, so I added half and drank the rest like a shot, as you do.
Whoa!
The rest is the same as usual. Lazily whip some eggs into the meringue of upside down conquering, stir in the first third, fold in the next 2/3, portion it out. She does recommend cleaning the edges of the ramekins, so I kind of did that same channel thing from yesterday. Then into the oven they go. Ended up giving these like 17 minutes because I was expecting them to brown on top and apparently they don't. But look at that rise! It fell so fast, but this is definitely the best and prettiest rise I had yet. The set inside was just right too. They were very lightly sweet and lightly lemony, so at first I was like, eh. Still mostly egg flavor. But then it grew on me, weirdly and quickly. And I think actually, these are my favorite out of all of them so far. Unexpected.
I feel like my framing gets worse every time. I'm really bad at remembering how tall I am. Alrighty, hello. It is a dreary and rainy day 5, and we're on to the final hurdle, carrot souffle. This one's more of a fun little goof here, namely because I'm not really following any specific recipe, but I think carrot souffle is what first got me interested in souffle in general. I recall seeing a beautiful picture of a bright orange carrot souffle on Instagram, and I was like, ooh. So here we are, rounding out the 5 souffles with caramp. The weird thing here is that pretty much every recipe that I found is not a real souffle, it's more like a carrot casserole, and it's very American. It doesn't use whipped egg whites, It puts in baking powder instead, and they're also all sweet, usually very sweet. If this does not work, it's okay. I'm not gonna redo it like I did the chocolate souffle. I'm making this up as I go, so it doesn't have to work perfectly. I'm lightly basing my ingredient choices off of a Paula Deen recipe. I'm basing my method off of the Sally's Baking Addiction chocolate souffle recipe, and I'm basing the ingredient amounts off of like both? I don't know, I'm kind of guessing on that. So I've already boiled my carrots so that they are ready to be blended down, and let's do it.
We do the buttering, we do the sugaring, we do the making of the mess. So I started with about 3 ounces of carrots and 36 grams of butter. Why? I have no idea. Attempted to blitz those down, but it was such a small amount, it didn't really want to blitz. So I just dumped in the rest of my boiled carrots anyway. Have you ever desired a rich carrot butter? I've got one. I had the leftover egg yolk from yesterday in the fridge, so I dumped that into the carrots and then decided on 2 more eggs separated as usual. There's typically the same amount of yolks and whites, or more whites than yolks, so I'm kind of going opposite here, and we'll see what happens. Added some cream of tartar because I like my egg whites like I like my men. Stabilized. To the yolky carrots, I added an unknown quantity of cinnamon and all the flour left in my jar, because I think we all know I'm past the point of measurements. Meringued for seemingly the millionth time, and I added 3 uneven spoonfuls of sugar because I don't want it to be super sweet. Folded that in like normal, and y'all, this pretty much looks the same as the others when it comes to consistency, so I don't know, it might work. Perfectly filled 3 ramekins too, which is just pure luck. I did the thumb around the edge thing because that's just habit now, and off to the oven they go to either show my folly or prove me a kitchen genius. These are the first ones that really smelled amazing while baking. I gave them 17 minutes, but I think they could have used a little longer because the centers were still a bit too raw for my liking. And look, they didn't rise massively, but they did rise. The insides aren't quite as light and fluffy and jiggly as some of the others, but they are still pretty close. I'm gonna call this one like a 90% success because the flavor was really delightful, especially on this cold and dreary day. I think I just need to tweak the ratio of the base carrot sauce stuff to the meringue. Little more egg white, little less carrot.
Well, alrighty. Soufflés have been thoroughly explored, and I no longer have any fear of them. Because here's the thing, soufflés are not hard to make. They're not hard when it comes to technique. Are there a lot of baking techniques involved in making a soufflé? Yeah, I guess technically. I mean, you do have to make a roux, a bechamel, or a custard. You have to separate eggs, you have to make a meringue, you have to know how to fold meringue in. Those are technically all techniques, I suppose, but none of those techniques are difficult. Honestly, the hardest out of all 4 of those is probably folding egg whites in without losing your bubbles. And second of all, soufflés are not hard to make in terms of time. I've kind of noticed that a lot of times when people refer to a certain recipe or type of cooking or baking experience as difficult, it's not really about the techniques involved, it's about the amount of time it takes. These are super fast. I was able to whip these up in like 15 to 20 minutes. So as far as the world of baking goes, that's not a long time. I didn't have to have anything fancy to make these. I think the fanciest thing is a ramekin because, I mean, this is something that I had to specifically go buy when I wanted them. Not for this, it was for creme brulee, but you know, I didn't just have ramekins laying around. Other than that, I was just using bowls, pans, spatulas, and a hand mixer. Not hard. And one thing that I really like about the soufflés is that most of the recipes that I saw and used required an even number of yolks and whites. They use the entire egg. This is what I run into with creme brulee. We make creme brulee all the time and it only uses egg yolks. So I end up with a bunch of egg whites in the fridge and then I have to make either meringue or financiers. Like I have to remember, oh, I have to make something else now. So I love something that uses the entire egg even though it separates them out. And I didn't know that soufflés did that beforehand. I thought they only used the egg whites. So yes, it's been a delightful 5, 6 days of making souffle. I'm gonna not make one for a while now. So, do not be afraid of any food. Find all the ones that you're most afraid to make, take a day, and make them, because you might just find out that they are quick, easy, and delicious. Cool. I kind of overestimated the amount of eggs I would need for this, and now I have a lot of leftover ones. So, what eggy food should I explore next?